Sammy here wanted me to tell you that he wants you to watch this video because he loves you. Thanks for the intro, big guy. 2024 may have been your year, but we're not ready for you just yet. While we may already be in the second week of 2025, I still wanted to take a moment to reminisce. I enjoy making these videos because they give me the time to look back on what I've done to gain perspective, set precedents for the future, and the extended opportunity to thank you for your continued support and being an integral part of what I'm able to do on this channel. 2024 was a year defined by experimentation, full of highs and lows. In the midst of it, I kept feeling like nothing was happening, but that couldn't be further from the truth. This was Sam's year after all. I hadn't built much near the end of 2023, and creating things is in my very DNA. That's why I wanted to start 2024 right with a proper project, a tabletop moss grotto. This was perfect for the backdrop of the nature design studio where I'm sitting right now. Although the year began in the studio, I actually didn't get a chance to do much work here, even though the table appears to tell a different story. Things behind me are a little bit messy as well, and that's because the rest of the room looks like a construction zone right now. That started much later though. In the meantime, I focused the build energy into one of my favorite designs of all time, the Creek Forest Vivarium. I initially thought the spider I found in my bathroom was a wolf spider, only to later discover it was a fishing spider. I made this tank to better simulate creek areas around my house where these spiders live. While the combination of elements made for a unique design, I think the cork bark pulled its weight, and many of you shared that sentiment. This not only gave me a better appreciation for cork bark, but also for spiders in general. Having kept a jumping spider and now a fishing spider, I can say there's a lot to admire about them. And they surprisingly make for interesting and rewarding pets. While I realize that many of my builds like this are kind of wacky and technical, I've always tried my best to make things accessible. With the correct information and techniques, it's more than possible to work under a budget. An aspect of that which has served me well for decades is reusing and recycling materials. It's easy for things to go to waste, but they don't have to, and that's what I wanted to show with the upcycled Paludarium. I made it entirely from what could be perceived as junk material. I have big plans to lean more into that this year, but one of the things I do often that there's very little information on is using houseplants in an aquarium. It was one of the things I got the most questions about, so I made the definitive guide to growing houseplants in an aquarium. Although I've talked about it in the past, this video has some of the most straightforward and comprehensive content about it. I'm so glad that many of you have found it helpful, and I hope that it continues to be a good resource for years to come. I have a big list full of other concepts that I feel deserve similar treatment, but I'm curious to know what you would want to see. Leave a comment starting with definitive guide so that I can find it easily. With my project itch being satisfied, I did the first update of the year when the perfected low-tech aquarium was seasoned enough for animals. The stars of that video though were hands down the shrimp. They had been living in the previous aquarium for over 4 years, so it was so much fun to see how their colony had developed in a well-seasoned setup. That all happened within one of my IKEA tanks, which gave me the idea to revisit the Swedish warehouse once more. There I got some glass to exercise my carpentry muscles and create a custom table to house that beautiful green stuff we all love, moss. I don't get to build like this nearly enough, so I had an absolute blast with this project. I know there's always room for improvement, but I really like the way I explained it at the end of that video.
I absolutely love the integration of woodwork, design, art, and nature that goes into making a unique one-of-a-kind piece like this.
I guess you could kind of consider that a terrarium, but reluctantly, I didn't do that much terrarium content in 2024. That said, there was the 5-year update on the ASMR terrarium. Once I realized how old it was, I immediately got to work on its video, and the rest was history. It's always a lot of fun to make those videos, and it's probably one of my favorite terrarium updates so far. Terrariums are a huge theme of this channel, but another is improving and building upon things that I've made in the past. A project that many of you wanted to see a revised version of was a cave vivarium for my growing colony of rubber ducky isopods. I had a blast making this vivarium, and I honestly think it's one of the coolest looking designs I've ever made, which I guess was kind of a theme of 2024. Come to think of it, I feel like I kind of say that every year, but I guess it's a good thing because it means I'm constantly improving. Making complicated setups like that can be challenging, but what can be even more of a challenge is making things simply. I've made waterfall terrariums in the past, and it's something I'm still working to perfect. I made another iteration in 2024, which was probably the simplest of all, and it looked incredible. This also made me gain a greater appreciation for red lava rock, which is a material I don't use often. I thought an excellent juxtaposition for a simple waterfall would be one of the most complicated projects I've ever made, the vampire crab Paludarium. Vampire crabs were highly requested for years. I knew if I was going to do it, it had to be something truly unique. That's why I made a vertical Paludarium with 5 unique waterfalls. It was quite the undertaking, but many of you appreciated the effort. While I do thoroughly enjoy making wacky setups, and it's probably never going to stop, I do find myself more and more wanting to replicate animals' natural environments, such as the Spider Creek or the Isopod Cave. And I did it again in 2024 for Walnut the Loggerhead Musk Turtle. I've never really seen cypress knees in an aquarium, and this was the perfect opportunity to try such a thing because these turtles naturally live in environments with them. Till then, I had primarily been working out of the animal room, but I found myself at the Swedish warehouse yet again at my wife's request. She wanted a greenhouse up in the living room for tropical plants, so I took the opportunity to make one out of a display case. It turned out great, and she's been enjoying it since. I'm not trying to turn this into an update or anything like that, but I really wanted to show off the pothos roots and how impressive the leaves are on it. Making projects from things aside from their intended purpose is something that I really enjoy, and this gave me more inspiration to do exactly that with a material that I knew had potential for greatness, firewood. The firewood Paludarium is without question my favorite project of the entire year. It perfectly illustrates how versatile this art form is, and has made firewood one of my favorite scaping materials. I'm unsure when I'll use it again, and while there are similarities to dragonstone, I don't think anything looks quite like it. There are caveats to using it though, so if you're interested in making such a scape, be sure to watch that video because I explain all of it. This unique Paludarium made me realize that I've never really made one using materials from what I could find in my yard, like a native terrarium. I wanted to try that here, but within the nano scale. Although I had fun with this experimental project, I'd like to revisit the concept on a much larger scale in the future. While I was building and working on these videos, life was developing behind the scenes with the Cuban tree frogs. That was a crazy journey full of ups and downs that you just have to see to appreciate. What I'll say though is that I almost lost all of the frogs because of factors I couldn't control. That was definitely a low point of the year, but I'm extremely thankful that kiwi and mango made it into froghood. There was more in the works than frogs though. I was also working on a large aquarium to finally replace the 350-gallon Paludarium I broke years earlier. I would have had it done much sooner, but it took forever to source everything for it because I had to make something completely unique. Since it was such a huge undertaking, I decided to experiment and break it up into an episodic format. After all, it was my largest planted aquarium to that point, or so it seemed. I revealed in the next installment that this tank was not what it appeared to be. It has a truly unique feature that I decided to call a hydro sump. It's an overhead aquarium that works like a sump and uses terrestrial plants to filter the water. Funny enough, I actually foreshadowed it months earlier in the plant guide. Another one is to put all of the plants in an external system such as a sump, where they won't be able to be disturbed by anything, but you'll still have all the benefits of keeping them. It's an awesome feature that's allowed me to have all of the benefits of terrestrial plant growth while maintaining a relatively standard aquarium. Now I wanted the episodes to run back to back, but there had to be a gap in between because I was scheduled to speak at Aquashella and had to travel. I didn't just want to speak though. I decided to create part of Escape at Home that I showed in a video on stage before finishing it and ultimately giving it away to someone in the crowd. The rock paper scissors competition was fierce, but in retrospect I wish I had thought that out better. Either way, it's always an awesome opportunity and a huge blessing to be able to meet and connect with so many of you in person. It always helps realign my perspective and reminds me why I do what I do. That said, I don't think I'm going to be going to any trade shows anytime soon unless it really makes sense. I always get sick every time I go to them, and this one was no exception. Once I was finally feeling better though, I finished what I started on the aquarium series. It was great to see it with inhabitants, but more importantly, I was reunited with my favorite fish, Maxwell the knifefish. I'll share more about him and that tank later on in the year, because I didn't even have all of the fish in it at that time, and a lot has changed since. However, a project whose progression I was able to share was the DIY budget pond. A year in, and it was doing incredibly well. I'm glad because that was kind of the whole point. While ponds are often portrayed as being out of reach, it's actually not that hard or expensive to transform a backyard into a little wildlife oasis. That said, I plan to share an even more accessible and natural approach this season. While I've taken in many new animals in 2024, you wouldn't know because I've been pretty selective on what I've shown. I'm building setups for most of them now, which are part of the room remodel I mentioned earlier. One I did share though was the tomato frog. As most of you know, frogs are my favorites, so I'll showcase them any chance I can get. I gotta be honest though, I still haven't named it. Alyssa keeps calling it Mater though, and I'm just not crazy about that. I think it's time to go back to the drawing board. Let me know what you think. Anyway, this took us well into pond season, which meant it was finally time to revisit the giant pond in my backyard. I don't know how well it comes through in the videos, but my yard was a mess. I had so much to address, and out of necessity to keep content coming, I tried to experiment with this series again. There was just so much to do out there that it was impossible to simultaneously film all of that while also working down here in the animal room. The incredible feedback I received from so many of you on this series was the motivation I needed to push me through. My favorite installment of all was hands down the second one because it focused on all of the frogs. That was a crazy full circle moment for me because everything that I do is pretty much because of frogs, and to have this giant frog oasis in my backyard was incredible. A few other highlights were the Eastern Phoebe and Cowbird saga, as well as the Milk Crate waterfalls in the Pollinator Garden. It probably doesn't go as any surprise, but I've always been fascinated by the small and often unseen life below the surface. That's why one of the videos in this series focused entirely on that. However, I gotta admit that all of the labor involved to make that series, as well as pulling many all-nighters to get the content done, was my breaking point. For context, from 2017 to 2022, I uploaded nearly every week without fail. In 2023, I just wasn't able to keep up with that, and I was focused more on quality over quantity. However, moving into 2024, I wanted to go back to the weekly uploads, and I was able to do it pretty consistently for the first half of the year until this happened. To keep it brief, I think that my years of a terrible sleep schedule, largely because of the YouTube grind, finally caught up to me. I physically just couldn't do it anymore, and it was at this point that I switched to a bi-weekly upload schedule for now. I was very reluctant to do it at first because I knew it would have negative effects on the channel in the short term, but being able to get consistent sleep has been a game changer for me. I don't know how to describe it other than I feel human again. It's also allowed me to put more effort into each video because I have a longer window to do so, making them longer and more elaborate each time. Regardless, right when I decided to do this is when this became the year of Sammy. He splashed on the scene in his biggest appearance to date by literally jumping out of his tank. Long story short, he didn't like the drip feature, which forced me to finally finish a setup I was already working on for him. I probably would have had it done prior to that, but it took longer than expected to work out the kinks on a new vertical concrete technique. It turned out exceptionally well, and it's going to be my go-to for most builds moving forward. While I like to believe you enjoyed all the hard work I put into that, I actually think the people just like Samson. That's what he says at least, and why his video was the best of 2024. I used this same technique for an animal I've had since 2022 that I didn't show until then, Pistachio the cane toad. She had to go through quarantine and all of that, and I didn't want to show her until I had the time to make something like this. I think this design did an even better job of showing just what this material is capable of. You'd think that with all that room she'd be moving around a lot, but she's really not, and likes to just stay put waiting for her favorite food, which I just so happen to develop an allergy to, superworms. I gotta deviate for a moment to say that I did not expect to become allergic to nearly everything that I have to feed my animals. First it was bloodworms, then roaches, eventually most fish foods, and now superworms. Last year I kept getting these respiratory infections and had this long lingering cough that just wouldn't go away, and I couldn't figure out what was going on until I realized that I was being contaminated by the fish food. It contains krill and shrimp, or most of them do at least, and I'm allergic to both of those things. I've been wearing a mask when I feed now, and it looks kinda stupid, but I've been feeling great ever since. That was until I noticed that stupid cough was surfacing again over a period of about 2 to 3 weeks, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. I was taking precautions elsewhere, so I didn't think it was anything like that until one night after I fed Pistachio, I had a eureka moment. I fed her the superworms, and just after that my eyes started swelling up and my throat started closing up, and that's exactly what happens if I eat shellfish or with the fish food and stuff like that. So I realized I'm allergic to superworms now. I'm wearing a mask and gloves whenever I handle them and haven't had any issues since. I bring that up to shed light on the situation for anyone who's having similar issues and didn't connect the dots yet. Anyway, another project that was in the works for a while was the Lily Aquarium. I just loved the way that this environment developed over the course of the year and the story I could tell surrounding it. For those reasons and simply how the tank looked, it was easily one of my favorites from the year. I had a time-lapse camera on it for the entire year, which stopped me from doing anything major in the room. You better believe as soon as that thing went down, the renovation began. It's going to be an ongoing process to get all the tanks moved on the racks, but I got things headed in the right direction pretty quickly. That said, the tree frogs couldn't wait any longer because I got more of them. I made a temporary little oasis for mango, kiwi, papaya, guava, and lychee to grow in until they're big enough to join their older brother Mark. I put up a poll to get Lychee's name, and the winner was clear. They've at least doubled since then, and they'll likely be able to join Mark later this year. As they were settling into their new home, I completed the pond series. It was bittersweet because I was finally able to enjoy the fruits of my labor, but fall was on the horizon. As I look back on it all, I was kind of dissatisfied with how it was broken up into episodes and thought that I was doing it a disservice by not having it as a single episode. So I did exactly that and put it on the Tanner Serpa channel. As the days grew colder, the remodel in the animal room continued. However, just as I was making good progress, I made a huge mistake and haven't really done anything else with the renovation since. I miscalculated on one of the stands and didn't make it large enough to actually accommodate the tanks. While that was unfortunate, at least I made the 40-gallon rack correctly because my group of Betta Patoti were ready for a larger home. I had been growing them out since May and was really excited to finally showcase something other than the common Betta splendens. These endangered giants can live together, and I hope to document them breeding here soon enough. Speaking of breeding, this was the year of multiplication. First were the shrimp, then the isopods, and finally the vampire crabs. I rarely saw them in their Paludarium, so I had no idea what to expect until I took a closer look with a borescope. While the discoveries were incredible and I loved this setup, it made me realize that they can't truly be appreciated in this setup. I'm already working on their new home, which will go right above the new fire-bellied toad Paludarium. I recently got more toads, and I thought it was the perfect time to give all 4 of them a refresh. However, it truly came about after making Sam and Pistachio's tanks. Although I don't care for how the front opening tanks look as much, I can't deny how much easier they are for accessing and caring for the animals. As the room continues to grow, I sometimes have to put accessibility above aesthetics so I don't get overwhelmed. Even still, this is hands down one of my favorite designs because while looking complex, it's actually deceptively simple. However, as much fun as I was having with that design, later on in the year, Toby the spider unfortunately passed away. I didn't want to keep another spider, so I dismantled her old setup and built a new vivarium to deal with other intruders, stink bugs. They've been bothering me more than ever lately, and I figured why not have some fun for the end of the year and make a lighthearted project to house them in. While it began as a silly build, it ended up turning into an extremely appealing canopy-style design. Easily one of my favorites. After revisiting everything I was able to share with you, it makes me realize why I felt like nothing was happening for much of the year. My plans were just much bigger than reality, and while I likely could have done more if I hadn't switched my schedule, there's always this year. At least I was able to gain a better relationship with sleep and feel human again. All that I can say now is that I feel grateful. Grateful to be able to share these videos with you, and grateful for all of you. Your continued support means more than you could ever understand. I can't make any guarantees with my schedule other than I'll upload as frequently as I can on Saturdays at 8 AM Eastern Standard, including next week. Otherwise, I'll continue to do my absolute best to provide the content you know and love, strive towards innovation, and take you along for the ride. Thank you for an awesome 2024, and I look forward to seeing you in 2025. Let's make this one the best yet, Serpa Squad. Take care and peace. Oh yeah, Sammy wanted to say thank you again and said he's sending luck your way this year.